Welcome back, friends. Last weekend was a pretty busy one, including the London Grand Tournament, which had over 1,000 players all on its own. Finally managed to get all the data recorded and all processed and ready to go, so sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you like the video, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really like the video, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all my latest videos. And if you're looking for any other ways to help support the channel, you can check out my Patreon, patreon.com/workfriends, link in the description below. All right, guys, let's get started. Just one more quick note. The winner of the London GT was Liam with Chaos Space Marines. I believe it was his third win in a row, becoming the first person to ever do that. All right, and first up is the player numbers for the previous week. Last week, we had 1,441 players, and for the Dataslate, we're sitting at 2,140. We had 7,191 games, and for the Dataslate, we're sitting at 10,898. We had 11 tournaments last week, bringing the Dataslate total up to 26. All right, and first up is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. So just a quick reminder that Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. Anything within that range will be in green. Anything 5% above and below will be in orange. Anything above or below that will be in red. So coming in number one last week was Admech with 58.9%. Number two is Deathwatch at 58.2%. We had Grey Knights at 56.1%, Scissors Battle at 55.3%, and then Leagues of Votann at 53.6%. Then down at the bottom, we had Agents at 40%, Gene Stealers at 41.3%, Space Wolves at 42%, Tyranids at 43.1%, and Thousand Sons at 43.2. And these arrows here, they show the change for each army versus the previous week, so you can tell how they've been sort of moving up and down week over week. It was another really good week for Admech, almost 59% win rate. The changes since the Dataslate have been paying off, and they've been doing really well. It's only been a couple weeks so far. I mean, so far so good for an army that has been struggling down near the bottom for the basically the entire edition. It's nice to see. And then even Deathwatch and Grey Knights, some armies that have been struggling as well, are up near the top. So first time in a long time, we're seeing a few different armies up near the top of the chart. So, it's nice to see something a little bit different here and there. And speaking of those armies who were at the top, Death Guard is down around 48.8% win rate. So down below 50%, but still within the average. So respectable, but definitely not doing as good as they were last Dataslate. And then Imperial Knights barely made the cut over 45%. They're at 45.1%. So with the new codex came out, this is the first week with a lot of the new detachments and some of the changes that were made to them. So far, the results for the new codex aren't so great. If there's any Knights players out there, let me know what you guys think of the new codex. Is this just a sort of a little blip as they kind of figure everything out, or do you expect to see Knights sort of living down near the bottom/middle of the charts here moving forward, which wouldn't be a bad place to be considering how well they were doing for the last 3 to 6 months. In one small win is no armies below 40% this week. Even Agents managed to come out at 40%, which is good to see. But we did have quite a few armies below 45. So there was some armies down there struggling, like Thousand Sons, Tyranids, Space Wolves, and Gene Stealer Cults. They did pretty poorly last week, and Chaos Knights was just barely below 45%. One of the other armies that did do pretty well that had been struggling for a little while was Dark Angels, 52%. That's a respectable number. It's good to see. Overall, the chart is a lot of orange this week. A couple armies at the top there almost to 60%, but we don't have anyone below 40%, and a few of the armies are just sitting just below the 45% mark. Now, being at 45% is it's not a victory. You're still doing pretty poorly. With one tournament, the London GT, eating up almost 70% of all the players for the week, it can get a little bit skewy, especially when people are running specific lists over and over, trying to, game plan for one specific tournament. So, we'll see how it pans out in the weeks coming up, but it's definitely an interesting week when you have one massive tournament that basically is all the players for the week. All right, next up is the army representation for the previous week. So just a quick reminder that the average representation is about 3.7%. So if everyone played every army equally, they would all be about 3.6, 3.7%. So you can get an idea of how many players are playing each army. Coming in at number one last week, we had World Eaters at 6.5%. We had Space Marines at 6.2%, Aeldari at 5.8%, Tau at 5.5%, Death Guard at 5.3%, and Necrons at 5.1%. And then down at the bottom, we had Agents at 0.6, Deathwatch at 0.8, Gene Stealers at 1.1, Drukhari at 2.3, and Votann at 2.5. So World Eaters, after the changes that were made to them there in the Dataslate, they're definitely one of the more favorite ones, coming in, I think, number one for first 2 weeks. And it was all Berserker Warband, which is the clear favorite. Space Marines always a popular army, not surprised to be up there, same as Aeldari. They're performing really well. Tau is a little bit surprising to see up there. They kind of made a huge jump. Their numbers are good, but I didn't expect to see them that high. Death Guard is still riding a little bit off the previous Dataslate. I expect to see them drop over the previous weeks, especially if the results continue to be sort of just mid. People will eventually move away from that. And then you have down at the bottom there, you have Thousand Sons at 2.6, which I think they're going to keep dropping a little bit more. The results have been pretty poor so far, and I don't think people are too happy with the changes that are made. And then on the flip side, you have Admech at 2.6, which doesn't seem like much, but that's almost twice as much as they usually have. So if they can keep the results up, we might actually see Admech pop up into the green here, which is not too far away. Like I always say, it always kind of looks like this, but it's actually not as top heavy as it has been. For the last 3 months, we've been seeing Death Guard at 8 to 10%, and then we had both the knights at like 6%. We're just eating up 20% of all the players, but now we actually have a little bit of a decent spread, especially down at the bottom. You're always going to have agents and Death Watch down there. They're just kind of like niche armies. And yeah, overall, it's looking a lot better than it has in the past long while. So I hope to see this kind of continue going forward. Maybe balance out a little bit better, especially as Death Guard drops a bit. We'll see where those players go. But overall, not too bad. All right, next up is the combined stats for previous week. So we have Army win rates, XOX1 percentage representation. Just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage of players who went undefeated or only one loss at a tournament. It's not a perfect stat, but it's a good representation of how the Army is doing compared to the win rate. The higher the XOX1, the more likely to see at the top tables, where the lower the XOX1, the more likely they're going to be down near the bottom tables and have a much less likely chance to win tournaments. All right, coming in number 1 for the week was Death Watch. Number 2 is Grey Knights, Sisters of Battle, Dark Angels, and Aeldari. And down at the bottom, we had Agents, Gene Stealers, Thousand Suns, Tyranids, and Space Wolves. Deathwatch didn't have many players, only 0.8% of the meta, but those players who did show up did really well, and almost a 60% win rate, and their XOX1 was 36%, so over a third of all their players went undefeated or only one loss at the tournament, which is really good. And then you have Grey Knights and Dark Angels, two armies that have been struggling for the past few months, and they're sitting at over 50% win rate and over 23% XOX1, with a pretty healthy representation, over 3% each. A lot of players for each army, and they're all doing very well. 25% roughly of each army is going undefeated, only one loss. That's really good considering the average is about 15 to 16%. So the two armies there that kind of came from the bottom and are sitting up near the top right now. So hopefully they can keep it up going forward. Those armies deserve a little bit of a good streak here. One of the more surprising ones is Imperial Knights, 45% win rate, 11% XOX1. Still a decent rep with 4.4, but those numbers down there are pretty bad considering how well they had been doing. 45% win rate is barely over that average, and 11% XOX1 is well below the average there. It was, like I said, the first week for their new codex, so we'll see how it goes going forward. They might have to work out a few kinks, but so far, not the best results, but I don't think anyone's too heartbroken over that. Overall, besides the wonky outlier of Deathwatch, who had very few players, so, a couple good results here can kind of skew everything, the chart doesn't look too bad. It's a lot more balanced than it has been, at least, which is good to see. All right, next up is the tournament wins for each army last week. So last week, Sisters of Battle had 2, Admech had 2, Tyranids had 1, Tau had 1, Drukhari, Chaos Space Marines, Chaos Knights, Asher Militarum, and Custodes all had 1. So Admech with 2 more wins. It's kind of surprising to see. I think that brings them up to 3 so far in the last 2 weeks. So clearly those changes are paying off big time. So any AdMac players out there, let me know how you guys feel about the changes. Obviously, it's performing well enough to get a good win percentage and some tournament wins, so let me know if it's something you think can be sustained moving forward. And just a quick reminder again that the Chaos Space Marines was the army who won the London Grand Tournament. All right, next up is the tournament wins for each sub-faction. Kind of break down how each army gets their wins there. So for AdMech, Haloscreed Battle Clade won both their tournaments there. And then we had Veterans of the Long War, which won the London GT. And then for Tau, we had Monka. And then for Sisters, it was split between Bringers of Flame and Champions of Faith. All right, so next up is the win percentage by armies for the current data slate. So again, it's only 2 weeks of data, so it's not super concrete information yet. We need still a few more weeks to really flesh it out, but we'll see where we're at so far. So coming in number 1 so far, we have Grey Knights at 56.7%. Then we have AdMech at 56.3%, Deathwatch at 54.5%, Sisters at 53.1%, and then Custodes at 52%. Down at the bottom, we have Agents at 38.5%, Tyranids at 41.9%, Space Marines at 42.9%, Orcs at 43.6%, and Thousand Suns at 44.2%. So kind of like the weekly one, we have a few new players up at the top here. Grey Knights, AdMech, Deathwatch, Sisters. They're all armies that were near the mid to the bottom of the last data slate. Sisters being the exception, they were up near the top last one. So they're kind of maintaining right around where they were, but it's nice to see some new armies taking the top spot, even if it's only for a couple weeks so far. And some of the old players who were, running the show, like Death Guard, Imperial Knights, they're still in the green. They're down around like 49, 48%. So, totally respectable. Nothing wrong with that. And if they stay there, I don't think anyone would be too concerned or worried about that for now. But overall, the chart actually looks pretty good. The ones at the top are a little bit, 56%. That's pretty high, but again, it's just 2 weeks of data, so there's not too much there, so we have to give it a little bit longer. And then down at the bottom, we have a few armies below 45, but like Gene Stealers and Thousand Suns are just barely below. And of course, you have Tyranid, Space Marine, and Orcs who have been suffering and didn't really get enough changes to really bring them up too much, so I'm not surprised to see them down there. And then Agents, Agents is what Agents is. So let me know how you guys feel about this. You surprised to see AdMech and Grey Knights up at the top there, and are you kind of surprised to see Knights kind of struggling comparatively to how they were doing, down around the 48%? Not that they're struggling by any means, but compared to how they were doing, they're down quite a bit. So curious to see how it shapes out going forward, and let me know what you guys think. All right, next up is the army representation for the current data slate. So this is the percentage of players who play each army. If everyone played every army equally, they about 3.6, 3.7%. So this just kind of gives you a good idea of how many players are playing each army. So coming in number 1 so far, we have World Leaders at 6.4%, Space Marines at 6, Aeldari at 5.8, Death Guard at 5.7, and then Necrons at 4.9. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents at 0.5, Death Watch at 0.8, Gene Stealers at 1.2, Drukhari at 2.5, and Thousand Sons at 2.5. So the Old Faithfuls who are up at the top there, Death Guard, Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights, they find themselves down near sort of the middle of the pack right now, which, isn't too bad. And we have a new kind of number 1 here with World Leaders at 6.4%. They're definitely picking up a lot of the old players, I think. The changes were pretty positive for them, and everyone seems to be pretty excited about it. We'll see if it keeps it up moving forward, but so far, people are pretty pumped about the World Leader changes. Space Marines, not surprising to see up there. They're always popular. Aeldari is always popular. Death Guard, 5.7%. They're still pretty high up there, obviously number 4, but they're nowhere near the 8 to 10% that they were. And then Tau at 4.7. So there's an army that was down around 2 to 3% lasted data slate, and now they're up almost to 5%. So seeing quite a few new Tau players, which is good to see. And then down at the bottom, usual suspects: Gene Stealers, Drukhari, Deathwatch, Agents. Thousand Sons has a big drop off again because I think everyone's a little annoyed with the changes and they're not performing that well, so not surprising to see. Admech creeping up into the green. First time in a long time we've seen them up in the green, 2.8%. That's one of the highest they've been in a long time. And Orcs, despite their results, are still at 3.2%. And even Black Templars up to 3.5%. It's been a long time since we've seen Black Templars up around the meta average there. So really good for them. The new Codex is playing pretty well, so not surprising to see some players back. While this chart's never going to be perfect, I'm definitely a lot happier with how it looks compared to how it looked the last data slate. Much more balanced and spread out, which is what you want to see. Diversity always is better when it comes to this game like this. We have 26 different armies to pick from, and it's really disheartening when you play the same 3 or 4 over and over. All right, next up is the combined stats for the current data slate. So we have Army win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. Quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players to go 5-0 or 4-1 in a tournament. Like I said, it's not a perfect stat, but it's just a good way to represent how well the Army's doing in comparison to their win rate. The higher the XOX1, the more likely you're going to see them at the top tables with a better chance to win a tournament. So coming in number 1 last week, we had Grey Knights, then Aeldari, Deathwatch, Black Templars, and then Sisters of Battle. And then down at the bottom, we had Agents, Tyranids, Thousand Sons, Genestealer Cult, and Astra Militarum. So Grey Knights have been performing really well, 56% win rate for the first 2 weeks and a 25% XOX1. So a quarter of all their players are, going undefeated or only 1 loss at a tournament, which is, really impressive considering the average is around 14 to 15%. Black Templars, also another one of those armies that was struggling for a long time, got their new codex and have been doing pretty good. 52% win rate, 20% XOX1, 3.5% representation. So above the average in most categories and actually pretty close to the average on rep. So that's really impressive for them. And some of the armies who have been kind of struggling, not surprising, Tyranids, they have been kind of falling off week over week, getting a little bit worse, I feel like. And the first few weeks here are no exception, 42% win rate and less than a 9% XOX1. So despite their high representation of 4.3%, we're not getting much to any success out of Tyranids at all. And same can be said for Thousand Sons. And despite, some of the armies that are struggling, we do have a pretty balanced chart here. There's a clear drop-off around Emperor's Children. It takes a big drop-off when you hit Chaos Knights, Chaos Demons there, that category. But, you have the top, half is pretty balanced and the bottom half is pretty balanced with each other. And overall, it's not too bad. It has been a lot more imbalanced over the previous, few months. So if you can keep this up going forward, it'll be a much more balanced data slate. All right, now we have the Army tournament wins for the current data slate. So again, 2 weeks of data here. Broken down week over week so you can see when each army's winning their tournaments. So Aeldari is coming in number 1 so far with 4. They got them all in the first week. And then we have Sisters of Battle and Admech, both with 3. And then we have Tyranids, Chaos Knights, and Blood Angels with 2. And then we have a smattering of armies down there with 1. So big surprise up there at the top, Admech with 3. Usually they only win 1 or 2 tournaments for a whole data slate. This whole edition has kind of been that way, but they've won 3 already. We'll see if it keeps up going forward. People adjust or how it plays out. But so far, really good results for Admech. They deserve it. They've been down for a long time. I don't think anyone would be too upset if Admech won a bunch of tournaments this data slate. I think they're due for some here. But overall, there's no one army running away with it. And Aeldari won 4 the first week, but they didn't win any this week. So, if we can keep this a little bit more even compared to last data slate where 1 or 2 armies won like 60% of the tournaments or something crazy, then we'll be in a much better spot. All right, and the first faction focus this week is going to be Admech. So again, this is one of those armies that I said have been doing really well. Kind of surprisingly after the changes, I don't think anyone expected them to be doing this well. So that'd be a good time to take a look at them. So taking a look at their past 8 weeks results there, you can clearly see where the changes were made. They were anywhere from like 1.3 to 1.9 rep, and they jumped all the way up to 2.5% to 3%, so almost double. And the win percentage went anywhere from like 45 all the way up to 59% this week. So clearly the changes in the data slate were actually pretty positive, and it's really paying off for them. And if you look at their stats versus the meta average, their win percentage way above the average, 56 versus 48.8. Army rep is 3.6 is the average. They're at 2.8, so they're not quite there, but they're a lot higher than they usually are. Their XOX1 is surprisingly low. 15.9% is the average, and they're at 12, so a little bit below there. So you're getting a lot of mid-board results here. Not too many people sort of dominating the tournament scene, but things might balance out over the coming weeks here. And there are 3 tournament wins versus the average of 1, so the players who are making it through are definitely finding some ways to win. Looking at the sub-faction player counts here, you can see that Haloscreed is the clear favorite with almost 63% of the player base. Skitarii does have 30%, and then the cohort Cybernetica has the last remaining 7%. So clearly everyone's playing Haloscreed right now. And the win percentages actually are pretty average here. You have Haloscreed with almost a 54%, cohort with 55%, and then Skitarii with a 60% win rate. So far, so good. None of the detachments are really faltering. Now, again, it is just 2 weeks of data here, but so far, so good for Admech. If there's any Admech players out there, let me know what you guys think. Are you having a lot more fun with the new rules and how everything's kind of shaping up? Do you expect to see them sort of maintaining a really strong win rate moving forward, or how do you think it's going to pan out for the rest of the data slate? All right, and the second faction focus this week is an army kind of at the other end of the spectrum. We have Thousand Sons. So Thousand Sons were doing pretty well last data slate, and then they got nerfed, and their results kind of dropped off, kind of opposite of Admech there. So looking at the past 8-week results, you can see roughly when the changes were made, because you can see their representation drop anywhere from like 4 to 4.5 down to like 2.5%, and their win rate anywhere from 50 to 55 down to about 45%. So there's a clear change there that really affected the win rate, and obviously people stopped playing them because they kind of saw this coming. And if you look at the stats for some meta average there, you can see the win percentage is 44 versus 48.8, so well below there. Representation is down quite a bit, over 1% below the average rep. XOX1 is only 9 versus 16, so almost half as much as the average, so they're really struggling to get any meaningful results in tournaments, and unsurprisingly, they haven't won any tournaments yet. Looking at the sub-faction player counts there, you can see Grand Coven has about 81% of the player base. Rubicon Phalanx has 18%, but really not much to mention there. Everyone's clearly just trying to make Grand Coven work right now. Looking now at the sub-faction win percentage there, you can see that Grand Coven, despite all the players and everyone's sort of putting all their eggs in one basket there, their win percentage is only 44%. Rubicon does at 49%. Now, there's not a ton of players for that, so, one player doing well can kind of skew the numbers right now. So we'll have to see how that kind of pans out over the coming weeks, but so far, the one that everyone is expecting to do good, or the one that they're hoping to do good, it really isn't getting much results at 44%. So if there's any Thousand Sons players out there, let me know what you guys think. How you feeling after the changes, and what do you think is the biggest contributor to the fall off here? I know there's a few rules changes and stuff that kind of affected how the army plays. So do you think there's any hope for them in this data slate, or are you just kind of biding your time, waiting 3 months, and hope they revert some of the changes to kind of give you guys some of your functionality back? And that is it for this week, guys. Thanks for watching. Big shout out to my Patreon members, Meet the Great, John Garman, William Viz, and Stayak, and my YouTube channel members, Andrew Stone. You guys' extra support means a lot to me. It's a lot more work now to go through everything and kind of manually copy all the data down, but I do enjoy doing it, and I'm going to keep doing it. And if you guys like the video and you guys like my content, and you want to help support me and support all the extra work that goes into it, just visit my Patreon, and any help is greatly appreciated. Good luck in the tournaments this weekend, guys, and we'll see you next week.